The first slide had my framework on it. My revenue model. My risk projections. My 18 months of work distilled into 47 slides that I had built alone, often past midnight, often on weekends when the office was empty and quiet. But when the presentation loaded on the wide screen in front of 12 senior executives, my name was nowhere on it. Wayne Prescott stood at the front of the room in his tailored navy suit, clicker in hand, walking through my strategy like he had dreamed it up in the shower that morning. He used my language, my phrases, even the metaphor about infrastructure debt that I had coined during a late-night modeling session in March. I sat 3 rows back, watching him take credit for every single insight I had developed. My mouth opened once, instinctively, to clarify a projection he had just misquoted. Wayne turned to me with a calm, practiced smile. "Bianca, let's keep questions for the end. This is a strategic discussion." The room shifted. A few executives glanced at me, then back at Wayne. The message was clear. I was audience. He was architect. Nobody questioned it. Nobody asked why the person who supposedly built a billion-dollar strategy needed someone else to sit quietly while it was presented. The applause at the end was generous. Wayne nodded like a man accepting something he deserved. I stared at the final slide, the one with the authorship line, where my name used to be before he replaced it with his own. The applause continued into handshakes. Senior Vice President Colleen Watts crossed the room to shake Wayne's hand. Chief Financial Officer Martin Hale told him the revenue model was the most sophisticated projection framework he had seen in a decade. Wayne accepted every compliment with practiced humility, the kind that sounds modest but really means keep going. Then came the moment that changed everything, though nobody in that room understood it yet. Martin Hale slid a single document across the table. "Wayne, we need your signature on the certification page before this goes to federal filing. Standard Compliance Protocol. The authorship verification confirms you personally developed and validated all projections." Wayne didn't hesitate. He signed without reading the clause above the signature line. I watched his pen move across the page with a flourish, watched him accept full legal accountability for a financial model he could not explain, projections he had never stress-tested, and risk thresholds he did not understand. I knew what that signature meant because I had drafted the certification language myself 6 months earlier, when compliance updated their federal submission protocols. The authorship verification was not a formality. It was a binding declaration that the signer had personally created, reviewed, and validated every assumption in the filing. If any projection was wrong, if any threshold was misrepresented, the signer bore personal regulatory liability. Wayne had just signed his name to my work without understanding a single number beneath it. I said nothing. I picked up my notebook and left the room quietly while everyone congratulated the man who had just handed me everything I needed. My name is Bianca Richardson. I was 34 years old and had spent 6 years at Penfield Partners, a mid-tier financial consulting firm based in Columbus, Ohio, that had recently landed its first federal infrastructure contract. That contract was the reason I had been hired. My background was in quantitative risk modeling. I had a master's degree from Ohio State and had spent 3 years at a regional bank building projection frameworks before Penfield recruited me specifically to develop their federal strategy division. For 18 months, I worked alone on the model that Wayne presented that morning. I built the revenue projections from raw census data. I designed the risk thresholds using methodology I had developed during my graduate research. I wrote every line of every formula in every spreadsheet. I documented every assumption, every variable, every sensitivity test. I did this work without recognition because Wayne had positioned himself as the division's strategic leader from the day I arrived. He attended the meetings. He summarized my findings in emails to leadership. He translated my technical language into executive talking points and gradually, systematically erased my contribution from the narrative. But there was something Wayne never thought about. Every version of every document I created was archived automatically on Penfield's internal system. Every edit, every timestamp, every revision was logged with the original author's credentials. 18 months of my intellectual fingerprints were sitting in a server that Wayne did not even know existed, waiting patiently for the day someone would finally look. That evening, I sat at my desk long after everyone else had gone home. The office was dark except for the glow of my monitor. I opened the document management system and pulled up the strategy file, the one Wayne had presented that morning with his name on the cover. I clicked on the metadata tab. There it was. Original author, Bianca Richardson. Created 14 months ago. Last modified by Wayne Prescott, 6 days before the presentation. His only edit was to the cover page. He had changed the authorship credit and reformatted the title slide. The 46 pages of analysis beneath it were untouched. Every formula, every projection, every footnote still carried my digital signature. Wayne had been careless in the way that confident people often are. He assumed nobody would look beneath the surface. He assumed the cover page was all that mattered. But federal filing protocols at Penfield tracked the origin creator of every document submitted for regulatory review. The system did not care whose name was on the cover. It cared whose credentials were embedded in the file's creation history. Printed nothing. I downloaded nothing. I simply verified what I already knew and then closed the system. The records were there. They were immutable. They were time-stamped. And they told a story that directly contradicted the signature Wayne had placed on the certification page that afternoon. I turned off my monitor, gathered my things, and drove home in silence. There was nothing to rush. The evidence was not going anywhere, and neither was I. 2 weeks later, Wayne called me into his office for my annual performance review. He sat behind his desk with a printed evaluation form already filled out. He did not ask me to sit down, so I stood. "Bianca, I want to be honest with you," he began, folding his hands. "Your technical skills are solid. Nobody's questioning that. But at the leadership level, we need people who think strategically. Big picture. You're operational. You execute well, but strategy isn't your strength." I looked at the evaluation. He had rated me average in strategic thinking, below expectations in leadership presence, and strong in technical execution. The overall recommendation was reassignment to a support function. "I'm moving you to the internal analytics group," he continued. "You'll report to the operations team. It's a better fit for your skill set." He slid the reassignment form across the desk. I read every line carefully. The transfer removed me from the Federal Strategy Division entirely. It removed my name from active project files. It removed my access to the submission pipeline. It also removed my liability. By signing this form, Wayne was confirming that I had no authorial responsibility for the federal filing. He was certifying that the strategy, its projections, its risk thresholds, its compliance architecture, belonged entirely to him and his division. I picked up the pen and signed without argument. Wayne looked surprised, maybe even disappointed, as though he had expected me to fight, to cry, to give him a reason to call me emotional. "Good decision," he said. I walked out with the cleanest exit I could have asked for. The internal analytics group sat on the 4th floor, 2 levels below the executive suite where Wayne held court. My new desk was smaller. My new title was junior. My new colleagues assumed I had been demoted for poor performance, because that was the story Wayne had told. But the 4th floor had something the executive suite did not. It sat directly adjacent to the Compliance and Regulatory Affairs Department. I could hear their conversations through the thin office walls. I ate lunch in the same break room. I passed their filing cabinets every morning on my way to my desk. Within 2 weeks, I understood their review cycle. Within a month, I knew which analysts handled federal submission audits. I learned their process, their language, their concerns. Not by asking questions but by listening. Quietly. Consistently. Wayne never visited the 4th floor. To him it was where careers went to end. He sent me a single email after the transfer. A brief note thanking me for my years of contribution to the strategy division and wishing me well in my new role. The tone was generous in the way that dismissal always is when the person doing the dismissing wants to feel noble about it. He thought he had removed me from the game. He thought the reassignment had neutralized whatever threat I might pose. What he did not realize was that he had moved me closer to the one department that would eventually examine every claim he had made and every document he had signed. 6 weeks after my reassignment, the federal strategy was officially submitted to the Department of Commerce under Wayne's authority. His name appeared on every certification page. His signature validated every projection. His title was listed as primary architect. I learned about the submission through an internal announcement email that went to all staff. Wayne had written it himself, thanking the leadership team for their vision and promising that this strategy would position Penfield Partners as a national leader in federal infrastructure consulting. The announcement included a photo of Wayne shaking hands with the CEO. Everyone on my floor murmured polite congratulations as though a great thing had been accomplished. I said nothing. But later that afternoon, I overheard something from the compliance office next door that made me set down my coffee. 2 analysts were reviewing the validation logs for the submission package. One of them flagged a discrepancy. The risk thresholds in Section 4 don't match the methodology documentation, she said. The numbers were adjusted after the model was finalized, but there's no supporting analysis for the change. Her colleague pulled up the audit trail. The modification was made 5 days before submission. Same user who changed the cover page authorship. They noted the discrepancy in their internal tracking log and moved on to the next file. It was routine. It was procedural. It was exactly the kind of small, quiet observation that eventually becomes an avalanche. I finished my coffee and went back to work. Her name was Denise Whitfield. She worked in the finance department and had been at Penfield for 11 years. We had never spoken more than passing greetings until the week after the submission, when she sat down across from me in the break room and said something that surprised me. I ran the budget reconciliation for the strategy project last quarter. The financial model in that submission, I know who built it. I looked at her carefully. She was not smiling. She was not gossiping. Her expression was the focused, serious look of someone who had seen a problem and wanted it handled correctly. The formulas reference a proprietary methodology that you presented at an internal workshop 2 years ago, she continued. I was in that session. Took notes. The architecture is identical. I did not confirm or deny anything. I simply listened. I'm not telling you what to do, Denise said, lowering her voice. But if I were you, I would make sure every version of that model is preserved exactly as it exists right now. Timestamps, author logs, revision history, all of it. She stood up and straightened her jacket. Finance keeps its own records. If anyone ever asks us who built that financial framework, we already know the answer. Then she walked away, leaving me alone with a quiet confirmation that I was not the only person who had noticed what Wayne had done. The truth had witnesses, and they were paying attention. The quarterly earnings call took place on a Thursday morning in October. I was not invited, of course. Transferred analysts do not attend investor presentations. But the call was recorded for internal distribution, and I listened to every minute of it from my desk on the 4th floor. Wayne opened with confidence. He walked investors through Penfield's growth trajectory, emphasizing the new federal strategy as the centerpiece of the company's 5-year plan. He called it transformational. He called it visionary. He used the word strategic 14 times in 20 minutes. The investors loved it. Stock analysts upgraded their projections. One fund manager called it the most promising infrastructure play he had seen in the mid-cap sector. Wayne accepted the praise with the same practiced humility I had watched him perform in the executive presentation months earlier. Then came the questions. A senior analyst from Wellington Capital asked about the underlying assumptions in the revenue model. Specifically, she wanted to understand the sensitivity analysis behind the third-year projections and how they accounted for regional variance in federal procurement cycles. There was a pause. 4 seconds of dead air on an earnings call feels like an eternity. Wayne cleared his throat. Those projections are built on proprietary methodology that accounts for multiple variables. I'd be happy to follow up offline with the specific technical details. It was the answer of someone who did not understand the question. The analyst moved on, but the pause had been noted. Somewhere in the background, someone was already writing it down. The earnings call generated enthusiasm externally, but internally it created quiet concern. 2 days after the call, I heard through the fourth floor network that Colleen Watts, the senior vice president, had personally requested a detailed methodology breakdown from Wayne's division. The request was specific. She wanted documentation showing how each projection was derived, what assumptions drove the risk thresholds, and who had validated the sensitivity models. It was the kind of request that a competent architect could answer in an afternoon. Wayne took a week. When his response finally arrived, it was a 5-page summary filled with generalities. He described the strategy in broad terms, referencing industry trends and market conditions. He used phrases like best-in-class methodology and rigorously tested framework without providing a single formula, a single variable definition, or a single validation record. Colleen was not satisfied. She forwarded the response to the compliance department with a note that read simply, "Please verify." The compliance team opened a formal audit package request. This meant Wayne would need to produce every document associated with the strategy's development, including original models, revision histories, validation records, and authorship logs. I learned this through the thin walls of the fourth floor, where the compliance analysts discussed their growing concerns in voices they thought were private. They were thorough people, methodical, patient. They would follow the documentation wherever it led, and I already knew exactly where it would lead. The audit package request triggered a routine IT retrieval of all historical document versions associated with the federal strategy project. This was standard protocol, automated and comprehensive. The system pulled every draft, every revision, every modification log from the past 20 months. I was not involved in the retrieval. I did not request it. I did not need to. The system did what systems do. It preserved the truth without bias, without politics, without loyalty to anyone's career ambitions. The IT report landed on the compliance team's desk on a Monday morning. I know this because I heard Denise Whitfield's voice in the hallway outside my office that afternoon, speaking with one of the compliance analysts. 23 versions, the analyst said. Every single one lists the same original author. The only modification to authorship attribution occurred 6 days before the executive presentation. Cover page only. Denise's response was measured. And the certification signature? Filed under a different name than the origin creator. That's a compliance flag under our federal submission protocols. The conversation ended there. But the implications were enormous. The certification Wayne had signed declared him the author and validator of the strategy. The document history proved he was neither. Under federal filing rules, that discrepancy was not an administrative oversight. It was a material misrepresentation. And the liability for that misrepresentation belonged entirely to the person whose signature was on the certification page. The same person who had told me I was not strategic enough to sit at the table. The compliance team requested an internal briefing on the strategy's methodology. They needed someone who could explain the framework technically, not as a sales pitch but as an engineering document. Wayne was invited. So was I. I suspect Wayne assumed the meeting was a formality. He walked in with a single folder and a confident stride. I brought nothing except my knowledge of every formula, every variable, and every assumption I had spent 18 months building. The compliance lead asked Wayne to explain the sensitivity model in Section 4. He gave a general answer about market conditions and conservative estimates. She asked again, more specifically, requesting the mathematical basis for the regional variance calculations. Wayne paused. Then he turned to me. Bianca worked on some of the technical inputs. She might be able to clarify. I did not look at Wayne. I looked at the compliance lead and explained the framework clearly. I walked through the methodology step by step. Identified every variable, every data source, every assumption. I explained why certain thresholds were set where they were and what would happen if they shifted. When I finished, the room was silent. Not with admiration but with understanding. The gap between Wayne's vague summaries and my precise explanations was now visible to everyone in that room. Then the compliance lead asked one final question. Were the risk thresholds in the submitted version the same ones you originally modeled? No, I said. They were altered before submission. Wayne's face went pale. The alteration of risk thresholds before a federal submission was not a minor edit. Under Penfield's governance policy, any modification to validated financial models required documented approval from the Compliance Review Board, a secondary validation by the original modeler, and a formal amendment to the certification record. None of these steps had occurred. Wayne had changed the thresholds himself, quietly, 5 days before the executive presentation. He had adjusted the numbers to make the projections more aggressive, more impressive, more likely to generate the kind of applause he received that morning. He did this without understanding that the thresholds were calibrated to specific risk tolerances that protected the company from regulatory exposure. The compliance team documented the violation in a formal incident report. The report was filed with the Internal Governance Committee and flagged for review by Penfield's legal counsel. The language was neutral, procedural, entirely without drama. But the substance was devastating. A certified federal submission contained altered financial projections that had not been validated by the original modeler, had not been approved through governance channels, and had been signed under a false authorship declaration. Wayne was notified of the formal review by email on a Wednesday afternoon. I know this because I heard his voice through the stairwell 20 minutes later, on the phone with someone, speaking fast and loud. This is ridiculous. I made minor adjustments. Every strategist refines projections before presenting. This is how business works. But this was not how federal compliance worked. And he was about to learn the difference. Wayne found me in the break room the next morning. He closed the door behind him, which was unusual. People on the 4th floor did not have private conversations. The rooms were small and the walls were thin. I need to understand something, he said. His voice controlled but tight. Why didn't you say anything when I presented the strategy? You could have spoken up. You could have helped me prepare. Instead you just sat there and let me walk into this. I set down my coffee and looked at him directly. You told me the presentation was a strategic discussion and that I should save my questions for the end. Then you reassigned me before I had the chance. That's not what I meant and you know it. Wayne, you signed a federal certification declaring yourself the author of work you did not create. You altered validated risk thresholds without governance approval. Those were your decisions. I am not responsible for your decisions. His jaw tightened. I can fix this. I just need time to update the documentation. If you help me reconstruct the methodology notes, we can align the records and this whole thing goes away. He was asking me to help him alter compliance records retroactively, to participate in covering up a governance violation that was already under formal review. No, I said. He stared at me for a long moment, searching for something in my expression. Anger, fear, sympathy. He found none of them. You're making a mistake, he said. I don't think I am. He left without another word. Wayne spent the next 72 hours attempting to modify the documentation trail. He accessed the strategy files on the document management system and tried to insert methodology notes backdated to match the original timeline. He attempted to create validation records that would support his altered thresholds. He even drafted a memo to compliance suggesting that the risk adjustments had been discussed informally with me before submission. None of it worked. Penfield's document management system logged every access, every edit, and every attempted modification with timestamps and user credentials. Wayne's after-the-fact changes did not replace the original records. They simply added new entries to the audit trail, each one flagged as a post-review modification, each one undermining his credibility further. The compliance team noted every attempt. They documented the pattern. They flagged it as potential evidence tampering. Then the situation escalated beyond Penfield's internal walls. Because the strategy had been submitted as part of a federal infrastructure contract, the Department of Commerce had oversight authority over the filing. When Penfield's compliance team reported the governance violation through required channels, the Federal Contract Review Office initiated its own preliminary inquiry. Wayne's attempt to fix his problem had triggered the one consequence he feared most: external regulatory scrutiny. The kind that does not accept informal memos or retroactive documentation. The kind that follows audit trails to their origin and does not care about office politics or executive titles. The walls were closing in, and Wayne had built every single one of them himself. Her name was Tanya Coldwell. She was 26, sharp, ambitious, and had been Wayne's hand-picked protégé since she joined Penfield 2 years earlier. Wayne had mentored her, promoted her contributions in meetings, and positioned her as his eventual successor in the strategy division. She admired him openly and defended him reflexively whenever anyone questioned his leadership. So when the governance committee asked Tanya to provide a statement about the strategy's development process, everyone expected her to support Wayne's version of events. She did not. "I was assigned to the project 9 months after its development began," Tanya told the committee. "By the time I joined, the core model was already complete. The framework, the projections, the risk methodology, all of it was built before I arrived." "And who built it?" the committee chair asked. "Bianca Richardson. She designed the entire architecture. I assisted with data input and formatting in the final months, but the intellectual framework was entirely hers. Wayne provided oversight in meetings but never engaged with the technical model directly." The committee asked whether Wayne had ever discussed the risk threshold modifications with her. "No. I didn't know the thresholds had been changed until the compliance review. The numbers in the submission were different from the ones I had worked with. I assumed there had been an approved revision, but I was never informed of one." Tanya's statement was entered into the formal record. The committee scheduled a closed session with the board of directors for the following week. Wayne's own protégé had told the truth, and the truth did not include him. The board's closed session took place in the executive boardroom on the 7th floor. I had never been to the 7th floor before. The carpet was thicker. The lighting was warmer. Everything about the space communicated authority and consequence. 3 board members sat across from me. The company's general counsel sat at the far end, taking notes. A court reporter recorded every word. They asked me to describe my role in developing the federal strategy. I did, clearly and without embellishment. I walked them through the 18-month timeline, the methodology I had designed, the data sources I had used, and the validation process I had followed. They asked about Wayne's involvement. I told them he attended periodic update meetings and received summary briefings. I told them he had not contributed to the model's development, had not participated in validation testing, and had not reviewed the final documentation before replacing my name on the cover page. They asked about the risk threshold modifications. I explained that the original thresholds were calibrated to protect against specific regulatory exposure scenarios. The modifications Wayne had made increased short-term projected returns but eliminated critical safety margins. Then the general counsel asked the question that I had been expecting since the day Wayne signed that certification page. "Ms. Richardson, if you had been asked to certify this submission in its final form, with the altered thresholds, would you have approved it?" The room went still. Every pen stopped moving. Every pair of eyes fixed on me. "No." The word landed in the silence like a stone dropped into still water. I did not elaborate immediately. I let the answer stand on its own because it needed to. Then I continued, my voice steady. The altered thresholds removed safeguards that I had specifically designed to protect the company from regulatory exposure in the event of procurement delays or federal budget revisions. Approving the submission with those modifications would have meant certifying projections I knew to be unsound. The general counsel wrote something on her legal pad. One of the board members leaned forward. "Are you saying the current filing contains projections that may not withstand regulatory scrutiny?" "I'm saying the filing contains projections that differ materially from the validated model, and that the person who certified them did not understand the implications of the changes he made." Another silence. The board chair spoke for the first time. Ms. Richardson, are you aware that the person who signed the certification bears personal regulatory liability for the accuracy of the submission? Yes. I drafted the certification language myself when compliance updated the protocols last year. I watched that information settle across the room. The realization was visible on their faces. Wayne had signed a document whose consequences he did not understand, certifying work he did not create, after making alterations he could not defend. The board chair thanked me for my time. As I stood to leave, I felt no triumph. Only the quiet weight of truth finally being heard by the people who needed to hear it. Wayne called me that evening. I did not answer. He called again at 9, then at 10. At 11 he sent a text message. Bianca, we need to talk. This has gotten out of hand. I never meant for any of this to happen. Can we meet tomorrow? Just us. Privately. I read the message, then set my phone face down on the kitchen counter. There was nothing to discuss. Wayne was not looking for a conversation. He was looking for an exit. He wanted me to offer him one, to say something he could use, to agree to a version of events that might soften what was coming. I would not give him that. The next morning he was waiting by the elevator on the 4th floor when I arrived. He looked like he had not slept. His suit was wrinkled. His tie was slightly off-center. Small details that Wayne would never have allowed before. 5 minutes, he said. That's all I'm asking. Wayne, I think any conversation between us at this point should go through appropriate channels. Appropriate channels, he repeated, his voice bitter. That's corporate speak for, I'm going to let them destroy me. Nobody is destroying you. You made decisions. Those decisions are being reviewed. That's how governance works. He opened his mouth to respond, then stopped. Something in his expression shifted. Not anger. Not fear. Something closer to the recognition that no words he could say would change what was already in motion. He stepped aside and let me pass. I walked to my desk without looking back. The board offered Wayne a quiet exit. Full resignation with a neutral reference. Effective immediately. No public statement. No formal termination on his record. It was generous, considering the circumstances. Most people in his position would have accepted it and moved on. Wayne refused. I built this division, he told the board, according to the account that circulated internally within hours. I'm not going to slink away like I did something wrong. The model worked. The projections are sound. One technical dispute about authorship doesn't erase my contribution. The board chair reminded him that the dispute was not about authorship alone. It was about a false certification on a federal filing, unauthorized modification of validated financial models, and attempted retroactive alteration of compliance records. Wayne held his ground. He believed his reputation, his relationships, his years of seniority would protect him. He did not understand that the situation had moved beyond politics and personality. It was now a matter of regulatory compliance, legal liability, and documented evidence. His refusal to resign quietly forced the board's hand. Under Penfield's governance charter, a material compliance violation involving federal filings required disclosure to the Contract Oversight Authority. By refusing the private resolution, Wayne had ensured the matter would become part of the public regulatory record. The board gave him 24 hours to reconsider. He spent those hours calling allies, looking for support, trying to find someone who would defend him. He found no one. Not even Tanya returned his calls. The announcement went out on a Friday afternoon, as corporate announcements always do when the company hopes for minimal attention. The email from the CEO was carefully worded. Following an internal governance review, Penfield Partners is implementing a leadership restructuring within our Federal Strategy Division. Wayne Prescott will be transitioning from his current role, effective immediately. We thank Wayne for his years of service and wish him well in his future endeavors. The language was polite, empty and final. No mention of the compliance violation. No mention of the false certification. No mention of my name. Just the corporate machinery processing another departure with practiced efficiency. The second paragraph, however, caught everyone's attention. As part of this restructuring, Penfield is establishing a new strategic risk and compliance architecture division to strengthen our federal submission processes. Leadership for this division will be announced following the completion of our current board review. The fourth floor buzzed with quiet speculation. People who had ignored me for months suddenly found reasons to walk past my desk, to make eye contact, to offer small smiles of recognition. I did not engage with the speculation. I continued my work in the internal analytics group as though nothing had changed. Because for me, nothing had changed yet. Announcements are not outcomes. Titles are not justice. The only thing that mattered was what happened next. And I had learned long ago that patience was the most strategic quality a person could possess. In the days following the announcement, colleagues began approaching me with a caution that resembled respect but was really something closer to recalculation. People who had accepted Wayne's narrative without question were now reconsidering their assumptions about the quiet analyst on the fourth floor. Denise Whitfield was the first to say it directly. Everyone knows it was your work. They always knew. They just didn't want to challenge Wayne while he was in power. I appreciated her honesty, even as I recognized the uncomfortable truth beneath it. Silence in the face of injustice is its own kind of participation. The people now offering me support had watched Wayne claim my work for months and said nothing. Their late acknowledgement was welcome but not something I would mistake for loyalty. Tanya Caldwell stopped by my desk one afternoon. She looked uncomfortable, fidgeting with her pen. "I should have said something sooner," she said. "During the presentation. During the reviews. I knew it was your model. Everyone on the project knew. You told the truth when it mattered," I replied. "That counts for something." She nodded and left. I did not hold grudges. Grudges require energy better spent elsewhere. On Thursday, I received an email from the board chair's executive assistant. The subject line was simple. "Board meeting, your attendance requested." The meeting was scheduled for the following Monday at 9 in the morning. 7th floor. I read the email twice, closed my laptop, and allowed myself one quiet moment of acknowledgement that the ground beneath my feet had finally shifted. Monday morning. 7th floor. The same boardroom where I had given my statement weeks earlier. The same thick carpet, the same warm lighting, the same weight of authority in every surface. But this time the energy was different. The board chair greeted me at the door. The general counsel offered me coffee. 3 senior executives who had never spoken to me directly were already seated, waiting. The board chair began without preamble. "Ms. Richardson, the governance review is complete. Our findings confirm that the federal strategy architecture, including all projections, risk methodologies, and compliance frameworks, was designed and built entirely by you over an 18-month period." He paused. "The review also confirms that the certification filed under Mr. Prescott's signature contained material misrepresentations regarding authorship and included unauthorized modifications to validated risk thresholds. This finding has been documented in our regulatory filings and will be reported to the Federal Contract Oversight Authority as required." I listened without expression. This was not news to me. It was simply the truth catching up with the record. "Accordingly," the board chair continued, "Penfield Partners is formally attributing the strategy architecture to you as its sole creator. Your authorship will be reflected in all internal and external documentation going forward." The general counsel slid a revised certification page across the table. At the top, in clean black type, was the authorship line. "Bianca Richardson. Original Architect, Federal Strategy Framework." Then the board chair leaned forward. "We'd also like to discuss a leadership opportunity." They offered me the title of Director of the new Strategic Risk and Compliance Architecture Division. It was a significant promotion. Senior leadership. Corner office on the 6th floor. A team of 8 analysts reporting directly to me. I did not accept immediately. "Before I agree to anything," I said, "I need to understand the terms. I've watched what happens when someone's work is attributed to the wrong person at this company. I won't let that happen again." The board chair nodded. "What do you need?" 3 things. First, formal intellectual property attribution for all frameworks I develop. My name on every model, every filing, every certification. Not as a courtesy, as a contractual requirement. Second, direct reporting authority to the board on all federal compliance matters, bypassing divisional politics entirely. Third, an equity stake in any revenue generated by the strategy one built. The room was quiet. These were not the requests of someone grateful for a promotion. They were the terms of someone who understood her value and would not allow it to be appropriated again. The General Counsel made notes. The board members exchanged glances. After a brief discussion, they agreed to all 3 conditions. I signed the agreement that afternoon. My name on the signature line. My terms on the page. My future is in my own hands for the first time since I had walked into Penfield Partners 6 years earlier. When I returned to the 4th floor to collect my things, Denise Whitfield was waiting with a small smile. Corner office. 6th floor, I confirmed. It's about time. 9 months later, the federal strategy one had built was fully operational. The infrastructure contract generated $412 million in its first fiscal year, with projections exceeding $1 billion within the 3-year horizon. Regulatory reviewers praised the risk framework as one of the most sophisticated models they had seen from a mid-tier firm. Penfield's stock price rose 31%. In my office on the 6th floor, I kept a single framed document on the wall behind my desk. It was not an award. It was not a press clipping. It was the revised certification page with my name in the authorship line. Bianca Richardson, original architect. Below it, in a smaller frame, was a printout of my performance review from Wayne Prescott. The one that rated me below expectations in strategic thinking. The one that recommended my reassignment because I was operational, not strategic. I kept it not as a trophy and not as revenge. I kept it as a reminder that the people who underestimate you are sometimes the same people who hand you exactly what you need. Wayne left Columbus. I heard he took a consulting position somewhere in the Midwest, a fraction of his former role. We never spoke again. There was no confrontation, no final argument, no closure for him and none needed for me. He said I wasn't strategic. Turns out strategy is knowing when silence wins.